So I was laying down scrolling YouTube and I saw a video come across my feed that had me giggling, and I started kicking up my feet because it was about discourse that I personally have a lot to say about. The video is called When is Offense Justified? Analyzing Norms of Respect and Offensive Content. Now, I'm someone that some people may call offensive based on my jokes, maybe some opinions, the presentation of my content. Perhaps I'm sometimes too abrasive for people's likings. They'd want someone a little bit more soft-spoken, easygoing, and maybe I'm too intense for you, okay? That's fine. In the world of chicken wings, not everyone's going for a fucking atomic wing to have themselves shitting out blood after consumption. I get it. I understand. Or maybe people just don't like that I'm a proponent of certain types of comedy that are, maybe come at the cost of others. There's that whole discourse about punching down versus punching up. Can you make jokes at the expense of other people? Is that okay? All this sort of stuff. I have not watched this video. I just saw it and opened up OBS to have this conversation with the video like a schizophrenic, insane person. And of you guys, of course, you guys aren't invisible to me, he says, talking into a mic in a fucking empty room. Normal. I'm just a normal guy, okay? What are you gonna do? But let's talk about offensiveness. Is it okay to be offensive? Before we get into the video, I would say in some cases yes, in some cases no. Wow, what a grass is green take. I know. Wow, shocking. But undoubtedly, in the past, whatever, decade or so, everything is offensive, it feels like. And, that might sound like something that Tom McDonald might say before dropping the worst song of all time. I understand. But it's true! Everyone's walking on f***ing eggshells, and one thing that's on my bucket list, a personal goal I've set for my life, like a side quest, is I want to do stand-up at some point. I want to try it. I know I might suck, I might bomb, and I'm down for that. I'm down to get booed off stage. I want to take that risk. I want to try and fail, or maybe try and succeed. But so much of comedy is laughing about the differences between people, laughing at horrible things that might be offensive, or turning things that are bad into these artistic jokes that can be laughed at. It takes talent to turn something horrible into something that you can joke and laugh about, and that's like an art form in itself. So yeah, one thing I would say is if you're looking at a joke and you get offended at a fucking joke, you are the most pathetic person I think that I see in my day-to-day life. Like, I see people like this on Twitter. Now, that being said, if you get offended at someone saying something actually offensive, well, that's a different thing. If someone just gets on Twitter and just says like, oh, X group of people, and there's no punchline, and that guy's just a hateful person, that's different. Now, how you go about being offended is the next question, right? Do you respond to that? Do you engage with that? Do you cry about it? What do you do? My advice would be to just move on. I would say a lot of the times you're gonna encounter people who are just fucking saying mean shit for no reason, where there is no joke, there is no punchline, and the tone of it isn't mean as like a comedic thing, because some people, they might sound mean, and some people might think that they're actually being mean when it's just for comedy. Like Bill Burr is a great example. People think he's mean, but that's just his style of comedy. I'm talking about people who you genuinely can tell, if you carve into their intentions, it's just to be an asshole. Just ignore them, I feel like, especially when it's self-imposed, like you're scrolling. Just keep scrolling, bro. Anyway, let's get into it.
Imagine a classroom discussion of Lawrence v. Texas, the U.S. Supreme Court's landmark decision holding sodomy laws.
Hold on. I was not expecting a Supreme Court case within the first 7 seconds. Okay, well, it's... oh, no.
Unconstitutional. One student argues that the court's ruling was correct because a state may not base its criminal laws on bare moral disapproval. Another student responds that if that principle were sound, polygamy and bestiality would also be immune from punishment. A third student chimes in to observe that those comparisons are offensive, even harmful, and urges or intimates that the second should apologize. What should happen next? This is the imaginary scenario that philosopher Benjamin Idelson considers in his recent paper, The Etiquette of Equality. In one sense, we can say that the second student is just performing a reductio, which is when you criticize an argument by showing how it leads to an absurd conclusion. For example, when Socrates said, humans are defined as featherless animals with 2 legs, and Diogenes brought him a featherless chicken to prove him wrong. Similarly, the second student is logically...
What?
He's brought him a featherless chicken to prove him wrong.
Oh, okay, so he's basically calling him a silly goose. I get it. So I don't know who Diogenes is, Diogenes nuts or something. Not really familiar with this guy's game. Sounds like a goat, though. If he's friends with Socrates, then he sounds like a real OG. Might get back to that later or something. Might have to check out his work. But that is a style of thinking that I've noticed take place sometimes, where if you'll make an argument and then people extrapolate the wrong thing from that. Plato here, he says, men are featherless bipeds, or bipeds, I don't know what that word means, and then Diogenes plucked a chicken and brought it to him, and he's like, oh, here's a man. Hilarious, because that's not what he's saying. Diogenes is representative of the current day, quote-unquote, now you're saying crowd, or the so you're saying crowd. It's when you say one thing, and then there's this type of person who would respond with the phrase, so you're saying that, and then say something that you didn't say. So if you say, for example, yeah, I think biking to work is good because it's better for the environment. Oh, so you're saying you hate people who drive cars? No, actually, I'm not saying that. I didn't say that. You're just wrong. And Diogenes is like, oh, so you're saying this is a man? Fuck you, Diogenes. Ass bitch. Like, it's sometimes fair to extrapolate conclusions based on what people are saying, and I might do it sometimes, so don't catch this as a contradiction. But people who do that sometimes are just like doing it in the most bad faith or just retarded way possible.
Similarly, the second student is logically showing how the first student's principle, a state may not base its criminal laws on bare moral disapproval, leads to absurd consequences, such as making bestiality immune to punishment. There's nothing offensive about that. Quote, yet I suspect many will share my instinct that this point of logic is not all that matters from a moral point of view. If many people interpret the second student as making a moral equivalence between same-sex intercourse and bestiality and feel insulted by it, then even if their offense might be mistaken, it's still important to investigate why this feeling of offense happens. But we should be careful. The more we treat misunderstandings as genuine signs of harm, the less we are able to talk to one another. It can cause the very people we want to create a caring space for to feel increasingly offended.
This is exactly what I'm talking about when I say walking around on eggshells. The idea that discourse itself is so fragile that you have to add all these caveats before you get a fucking sentence out just bothers me, you know? Alright, so, and I'm not saying, but, and it's just people trying to make sure they have like a custodian cleaning up their sentences, making them squeaky clean before they even spit them out, and it's just annoying, you know? It's this whole thing where the early version of this was like a trigger warning before you'd speak, and then it was a content warning, and then, you know, now it's people asking for permission to say certain things or traumatizing, trauma dump, whatever, and it can just be super frustrating and it's super inconvenient and inefficient in order to actually produce helpful discourse, especially in debates and stuff where you naturally disagree with someone. Bro, like, if you don't agree with someone, you're going to fucking argue. Now, if you're gonna be so focused on navigating that argument to be as non-disagreeable as possible or as like healthy as possible, then you're sort of not getting to the point of a debate. The point of a debate is to disagree, and the point of discourse is to actually exchange ideas in their rawest form. If I believe something and I want you to believe what I believe, I should just say what I believe. I'm not going to modify my belief to fit some mold of what you might want to hear or try to change what I think in order to make it easier for you to digest because you might be offended by it. Like, that doesn't make any sense. Try to have rational, level-headed discussions with people you disagree with without either censoring yourself while still being open-minded. That's how you do it healthfully. If you get your mind changed, you get your mind changed. If you change someone else's mind, then you change someone else's mind. It's a win-win. And ultimately, if you're a coward and you're like a very sensitive person who can't have these discussions, then that's just your own issue with being able to, I guess, either defend what you believe or just deal with people who disagree with you.
And to have a false idea of who is out to get them. More on this later. Now, whether you think the third student's offense was justified or not, whether you think the second student is blameworthy or not, the point is that there is some ambiguity in how to treat this scenario. Navigating situations of offense can be very difficult. Part of what makes it difficult to talk about the complexities of offense is how politicized it has become.
True, and one thing I noticed is that a lot of the time, in mostly political debates, and this happens a lot of times in like, you know, relationships where someone takes something personally and then they'll start fucking crying and accusing you of raising your voice or something. And the political version of that is thinking that someone said something like racist against you or accused you of something or implied that you're supporting blank. Oh, so you're supporting pedophilia, so you're supporting racism, all that sort of stuff. And then it just devolves into that person just like fucking like spurging out, and it's just annoying.
Especially when offenses are identity related, which makes total sense given that offensive statements exist within a context of systemic injustices. But we should talk about it. How we communicate with one another and how we signal respect and disrespect is extremely important to get clear on. Thus, we're going to follow Idelson's footsteps and approach this topic both sympathetically and critically. But please don't take this video to be an end-all be-all. As with all my videos, they should jumpstart your journey to learn more, not to give you a definite answer.
Same thing here. I'm just a person giving my own opinions. If you disagree with what I'm saying, feel free to tell me why. I'll try to read some comments on this video more than I normally would. I like discourse discourse like this. I like talking about the meta sort of stuff, just like talking about talking. I think it's interesting. But yeah, don't take me as some sort of person who has it all figured out. Like I'm a genius, I'm a fucking dumbass with a microphone. I just, you know, I've seen some stuff. I've been on the internet for a while. I've recognized trends. I've noticed things that are not popular that used to be popular and vice versa. And I can see from different periods of discourse, like what tend to work in message conveying and what's gotten through to people versus what hasn't, that sort of stuff. And also, I think there's a lot of overlap with what she's saying in terms of politics, with also comedy, non-political stuff, disagreements, relationships, all these sorts of things. And so, yeah. But again, like I said, I'm a fucking dumbass. This is the most like spiritual, lyrical, miracle sort of video I'm gonna probably get into, so I'm a dummy.
The first case I want to start with is this article written in 2014 called "Is It Right to Jail Someone for Being Offensive on Facebook or Twitter?" It garnered a decent amount of attention, as most media remotely related to free speech does, but basically there was a teacher named Anne Maguire who was stabbed to death by one of her students. Jake Newsome, a 21-year-old, posted on his Facebook page, "Personally, I'm glad that teacher got stabbed up. Feel sorry for that kid. He should have pissed on her too." A few days later, he was arrested, charged, and jailed for 6 weeks under the 2003 Communications Act for sending, quote, "by means of a public electronic communications network, a message or other matter that is grossly offensive or of an indecent, obscene, or menacing nature." Some comments were appalled by the fact that people could get jailed for saying offensive things, that it was a violation of free speech. But there were also comments agreeing with the choice to jail the 21-year-old. They claimed that free speech doesn't include verbal abuse or the right to hurl insults at your mother walking down the street. Regardless of which camp you fall more into, I hope we can all agree with the first two sentences of this article. What follows is offensive, the facts are unattractive, and there is no hero in this story. This is going to be a reoccurring theme.
Absolutely, and this is one of the most basic principles of free speech, that no matter what someone might say and how strongly you might disagree with it, they ultimately have the right to voice that opinion, no matter, you know, if it's distasteful or not. And it's that saying of, I may not agree with what you're going to say, but I will always fight for your right to say it, you know? I am advocating for people to have a platform to speak their minds, and I obviously agree, you know, there's certain cases. I feel like this doesn't even need to be said, where like pedophilia and like shooting threats and stuff, like that's just fucking criminal organization, like ban that. But we live in a time where most of what's being censored isn't stuff like that, and it feels more and more like the energy is directed in the wrong places. And there doesn't have to be a hero or a bad guy in this case. Like, these are two bad things that happen. Two wrongs don't make a right. Person says something fucking gross, then that thing that happened to that person was a bad response. They shouldn't have been fucking jailed. Neither of the things should have happened. That person shouldn't have said that. They shouldn't have posted that. That's mean. That's gross. Like, wishing for the death of a teacher, unless, you know, that teacher did something fucking crazy that I don't know about, is just crazy and gross. But then to get arrested for that is also, if not more, insane. There is no hero, you know? Free speech does need to be protected and maintained.
While the imaginary scenario with the students was about whether something is offensive or not, this debate about jailing people over offensive comments is about what the correct response to offensive behavior is, and at a more preliminary level, what the distinguishing feature of offensiveness is. Put another way, here are some different questions we can ask about a potentially offensive scenario. 1. Is it offensive? If we decide it is offensive, 2. What makes it offensive? And 3. How should we respond? To answer question 1, we often need to answer question 2, but I don't think that's always the case. Sometimes comments are so blatantly offensive that there is no disagreement on its offensive nature, such as the Facebook comments about the deceased teacher. But even after offensiveness is agreed upon, there's still room for discussion on what to do about it. I'll try to implicitly touch on these 3 questions throughout this video, though I will probably fail to adequately answer any of them.
The unfortunate truth, though, is that because things are so subjective, you may never get people to fully agree on what even is offensive. Especially with how divided we are as a country currently, I just feel like that's going to be a disaster. There is no chance at all we could pass some sort of law that would agree on what is offensive and what is not. There's just no way. And when you're calling something offensive, you're morally condemning, and that would imply that everyone, or at least the majority of people, share a morality on certain things. And of course there is certain things now as a people that we all agree are evil. At least like I'd say 90 to 80% of Americans do, and that's enough to make something like a morality-based law on, I would say. Like if 90% of Americans think that, you know, making a shooting threat is morally evil and illegal, whatever, like should saying that on the internet make it so that you're allowed to be deplatformed or silenced or banned? If that's what they say, then yeah, I would agree that's a criminal organization organization. But then there's certain things where it's like you're never gonna get people to agree on it, so how do you make laws on that? Dude, who fucking knows?
For the utilitarian John Stuart Mill, offenses are never harmful, and thus should never be regulated by the state. You can be offended by how bad someone smells in public, but it doesn't harm you. A homophobe can be offended by seeing a gay couple kiss, but it'd be strange to say that the couple harmed them by kissing. So this gives us a potential answer to question 2, and consequently question 1. Something is offensive when it causes a state of mind that we dislike, such as disgust, discomfort, outrage, etc. But while there is a difference between harm and offense as concepts, people today tend to think that in practice, offense can be harmful. However, when someone offends our moral principles, our core values, or sense of self, it can seem harmful. For example, in 1977, when the American Nazi Party applied for a permit to parade through Skokie, Illinois, a largely Jewish neighborhood, that seems pretty bad. So what's the difference between a harmful offense and a non-harmful one? Because this will affect how we respond to the situation. Well, harm can be defined in different ways, but I think we can go with James O. Young's definition as a setback to someone's interests.
I would say, though, in that case, where the Nazis are parading through the Jewish neighborhood, I don't know, man, I've smelled some pretty bad people. You know? What if the Nazis smell amazing? In that case, what are you gonna do? Kidding! Okay, everyone fucking calm down. But I will say, that is a great distinction to make between harmful offense and unharmful offense, because nowadays, everyone just thinks all offense is harmful. Everyone is looking for a reason to rationalize their absolute, utter discomfort by something that's just like, well, who actually cares that much, you know? And it happens on both sides. Everyone thinks that their offendedness is somehow the worst thing that's ever happened, and they'll find ways logically to do mental gymnastics to explain to someone who questions them on why they're offended as to why what they just witnessed is so offensive it should be illegal. I'm not saying everyone's wrong, but a large majority of people now are exaggerating and need to genuinely toughen up a little bit. Like the whole notion of the generational gap between Gen Z and whatever Gen X, of like, oh, Gen Z are a bunch of this is sort of what that's getting at, you know?
The biggest funder of the UK's Conservative Party, named Frank Hester, said that seeing Diane Abbott, Britain's longest-serving black MP, makes, quote, you just want to hate all black women because she's there, and that she should be shot. It would be much better if she died. She's consuming resource. She's eating food that other people could eat. Hearing these statements from Frank, it doesn't seem so reasonable for us to tell someone, especially if they're a black woman, oh, just ignore that. This extremely negative statement about all black women from a person in a very influential position makes it likely to think that the interests of black women are going to face some sort of setback. Now, I'm sure someone will quickly say, you can't know that for sure. When my leg's broken, I know for sure that I'm not going to be able to move the same. The harm is physical, it's objective, but when someone says they feel offended because something sounds racist, where's the harm? I don't see a bruise. They're just words. You're having a subjective reaction to them, but you can choose to close the article and ignore what he said. You can't even access other people's minds, so why are you assuming the worst?
I think it specifically in this case has to do with power. I think when you're talking about someone who is running to influence the country that you live in, whether by donating money or by pulling the strings to some extent, you do have to, I think, have a heightened level of awareness and be on higher alert to what they're saying. I do think that is fair. If someone says something racist and they're just some anon, okay, whatever, then I would say ignore it. But the person who has power, who is saying things like that or is trying to get power, that's harder to ignore, and you shouldn't ignore that. That might affect your material conditions depending on how successful they are in achieving their goals, right? Like, that is true. If Donald Trump said something like that, or said something like, oh, I think we should increase the amount of arrests that we do on Mexicans, and you as a Mexican are reading that article and I say, oh, well, just close that, why are you being so offended? That's fucking ridiculous, because, well, I don't know, that guy's trying to get power in this country and will actually cause physical harm. Like, that is different, you know? The power aspect matters a lot.
There is a point here, though, which again is why most people agree that there is some difference between harm and offense. In general, our tolerance for certain types of offensive material has increased. Telling people to kill themselves is just a casual Sunday morning activity on Twitter. 2024 Twitter would send 2012 Twitter into cardiac arrest, because this is how we were moving back then. In contrast, I feel like people today are relatively lax about calling others ugly or just commenting on people's appearance, and there's an expectation to not voice any offense taken on that front. There's a lot we could say about why this has happened. I'm thinking about theories of reclaiming offensive language as a mode of empowerment, or
well, everyone's just more toxic now. Every push that was meant to stop cyberbullying utterly failed in its tracks because a lot of it was out of touch. A lot of the bully hunter stuff from early 2010s, all the Gamergate stuff, even stuff from like Cartoon Network, Stop Bullying, Speak Up, all the anti-bullying stuff became very cringe, and people who were literally bullied were like, dude, please don't fucking like associate my problems with this. And so as a result, everything just became more toxic. The people who were bullies found the stop bullying stuff and just shat on it. And so everyone just kind of became more toxic. And people's ability to handle it didn't, you know, in some cases it got better, in some cases it got worse. The toxic areas became more toxic, which thinned the herd a little bit, and now you have these sort of safe spaces on the internet that are very not toxic and very, well, they're safe spaces, and it became like this completely unproblematic echo chamber to where if you were to step out of that, you'd be flashbanged by slurs, which is fine if you want to do that, but at least don't become clueless that you're in kind of a la-la land, I feel like.
The point is, I'm not saying you have to ditch your edgy humor. I do want us to notice, though, that it is perfectly compatible to hold the belief that people should ignore offensive statements and that the offender must stop what they're doing. James O. Young gives this analogy, quote, "Sometimes my children, who are normally delightful, tease each other. When this happens, I will tell my son that he ought to ignore his sister and not rise to the bait. This is true, but his sister still ought not to tease him, knowing that he will not like it. Similarly, there is a presumption that I ought not to engage in an action that will offend others." So you can tell people to toughen up if you also will tell the people spewing offensive shit to shut it. One of the main problems I have with people obsessed with free speech is that they tend to place the entire burden of responsibility on the person who feels offended.
That's totally fair. I completely agree. I think that in some cases, the internet is just too toxic, you know? I won't just tell you to go back to your safe space if you don't like it, or to get off the internet if you don't like it. In a lot of cases, that is true. I would say that if you don't like it, then leave. But in general, there are some places where it is just too toxic, and it's almost defeating the whole point. Like, what are we even here to talk about anymore? You kind of think that sometimes. In video games, I think is a great example. Like, if you're playing Overwatch and, you know, the goal of the game is to get good at the game, win your matches, rank up, and be the best player you can be. And if at a certain point, the voice calming that you do in the game becomes so toxic that it ruins your ability to actually grind, you have a right to complain. I'm not going to just tell you to toughen up or whatever, or to just mute the people or whatever. And sometimes I might, you know, sometimes I might say if it's like a per match basis, if you've gone 10 matches where there's no issues and then you get one guy who's just, you know, had a bad day and instead of beating his wife, he's taking it out on you, I would say, yo, just mute him, you know. But if every time you use that line of thinking, like, oh, just mute, then eventually you're not calming, and then eventually the game gets ruined. And then at that point, when the game is literally ruined, if your response to people telling you that is to say, hey, well, then just get off the game, well, motherfucker, you got to address the underlying issue at a certain point when it's actually ruining the game. The whole, if you can't handle it, then leave line of thinking absolutely has merit to it a lot of the time, but at a certain point, maybe we should address the underlying issue for some of these things, like especially in video games.
But communication is not a one-way street, and sometimes the shit people say is just bad. More importantly, though, there can be very good reasons to police our speech, even when you don't want to, or when you think the rules for speech are arbitrary. To see why this is, let's explore the norms of etiquette. You're buying a cup of coffee. The barista says, "Good morning, how are you?" You say, "I'm doing okay, how about you?" Now, the barista didn't have so hot of a morning. She forgot her Presto card or Metro card, whatever it's called in your city, so she decided to take her chances and commit fare evasion. But of course, the one and only time that she doesn't pay her fare, the fare inspectors come hopping aboard for her terrible, terrible crime of not paying $3.30. She has now been fined for $425. Good morning, how are you? I'm not too bad, take care. Why does the barista say this even though she doesn't believe it to be true? She could have not answered the customer, or she could have honestly said, "I'm doing horribly, and I'm too preoccupied with my own problem to care about this interaction."
Because honestly, people just don't want to make it a thing. You know, like, what are you gonna do? The whole thing about trauma dumping to some extent, you know, when you just meet someone is absolutely true, especially in a professional or a casual environment, you know, where you're just, there's a transaction taking place, you know? Like, if I'm gonna buy a coffee, and then the person I ask how they're their day was responds by telling me that, they pulled out of their driveway in their car and hit their neighbor's dog 2 days after they've moved into the neighborhood, I'm gonna probably be upset, and, my experience in that establishment is hindered to some extent. Regardless of how shitty people are doing, I think that internal censorship of like, oh, I just don't want to, say what's up because I don't want to ruin other people's days and, make it their problem is absolutely real, and it's been real for fucking ever. But also, a lot of people just want to keep it private, they don't want people to know about their biz. They just want to deal with it themselves. They don't want unsolicited advice or some random stranger knowing about their life in, like the most fucking sad, tragic details.
The only way to clearly express respect or disrespect, especially in these short 3-second interactions with a complete stranger, is to use publicly recognized practices, such as asking someone, "How are you?" We all recognize this phrase as an expression of polite respect, not a literal question about our well-being. At the same time, we don't want that communication to take too much effort, or else we would never be able to do anything. So instead of telling every stranger, "I acknowledge your dignity as a fellow human being. I have good-hearted intentions towards you," we substitute it with please and thank yous. Essentially, we want a, quote, recognized social currency that symbolically operates as thoughtfulness, but simultaneously alleviates its strains. Thus, we have routine, manageable, predictable practices like saying thank you, holding the door for someone walking behind you.
Manners. Literally just being manners. Etiquette is so simple and effective. It's an easy way to just tell people that you're friendly and you mean well. Manners are the most fucking goated creation of humanity because we literally were just like, alright, let's make these simple ass words that anyone can say at any time to convey that they're like just harmless and mean well. They're so useful. The utility of manners and polite gestures cannot be understated. It's a great way to find a common denominator between two strangers. Like, how's the weather? Remember how's the weather? Or great weather or bad weather. Weather chatter is just like, say what you want about it. People sometimes want to die when they think about small talk, and maybe even this video is irking you right now, but it's useful. How's the weather is great, because then you take that and then if you want, you can take it to any fucking possibility of a conversation. How's the weather? Oh, it's bad, which sucks because I was gonna, go to a water park. Oh, water park? Oh, and then you're flying. You got a conversation going. Possible new friend unlocked. Beautiful things we got going on here, and you gotta appreciate these, okay? We had a thunderstorm. My internet went out. I couldn't access my gooning material. Oh, what? You're a gooner? Yeah, I am. Dap it up. Oh, I don't really know if I want to. Don't know where that hand's been. Fair enough, brother. I don't know either. What? How do you not know? What? Fuck, I don't know. Damn, so you a real gooner. You know what I mean? Beautiful conversation like that between two healthy individuals.
And once we frame the issue that way, it seems clear that those who chafe at so-called woke norms on the ground that they are capricious or unjustified, who object say that there's nothing intrinsically disrespectful about referring to the blacks, or asking where a person of apparent Asian ancestry is from, and so forth, are often just missing the point. There's nothing intrinsically objectionable about wearing bright colors to a funeral either, but you still shouldn't do it. There are very strong moral reasons to say or not say, to do or not do various things based on our interest in being recognized as equals. What this shows is just as how we have etiquette norms for displaying politeness, we also have what Idelson calls an etiquette of equality. Norms and practices that designate how to signal respect for members of socially subordinated groups, and to avoid affirming derogative attitudes and stereotypes. Just as how there is nothing intrinsically wrong with wearing different colors to a funeral, or not saying thank you, there is nothing intrinsically wrong with calling me a chink. But words, phrases, and practices don't exist in a vacuum. They carry sociolinguistic facts, such as facts about who uses or has used them.